Welcome to session 2 of Ecopunk Futures, an art book adventure in 3 parts. In this session, we're going to be writing. So what you're going to need today is paper and a pencil or a word processor of some kind so that you can do a bit of writing. So I'm glad that you've come back to do part 2, and I'm excited to start to think about the words that we might add to the images that you put together yesterday. Hopefully you had a chance to finish your collage and kind of realize the vision that you had and that you have of the future. I'd like to start today, just like last time, by breathing. So everybody take a deep breath. And as we do so, think about all the living things in the vicinity, in the distant vicinity, that are exchanging breath with us and how we are co-creating place here together. So here we are now, in this time, in this place, in this world. And you as young people, I think, have a very important role in where we are and where we are going. And that's because you're young and you haven't been jaded by all of the things that have happened in my life, for instance. The possibilities are endless, and things that I think of as impossible, you maybe don't think of yet. The other thing that's really important is that you will be here in the future. And so the things that you are concerned about and the things that you care about really matter, because that is what the future is going to be built on. And it's important that everybody understands what's important to you, because you are the ones that are going to have to live here in the near future, and then your descendants, and on and on. So today we're going to think a lot about what's important and your reflections on place and on things, because your voice really matters. So the first thing that we're going to do is called Ephrasis, and that is a word that describes poetry or writing made in response to an image. So this is an image of Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, which he painted in 1942, and Anne Carson wrote a poem in response to this. I wanted to run away with you tonight, but you are a difficult woman, the rules of you. Past and future circle round us. Now we know more, now less, in the Institute of Shadows. So this is an example of Ephrasis that I really like, because it is writing from the perspective of something or someone you see in the image. So I'm going to show you 5 images, and I'd like you to, as a first writing exercise, write a poem or a sentence, or really a paragraph, more than a sentence, I'd say. So take maybe about 5 full minutes to write as one of the characters or objects in the image that you see. I'm going to scroll through these pretty quickly, but I encourage you to pause the video on an image that you like, and then just spend a moment with that image as you write, from the perspective of a character or something in it. Think about what the characters are thinking, what they might be seeing, what they might be feeling, what their voice sounds like. All right, so find an image and write your response, and make note of the number in the bottom left corner. because it would be great if you could share these on the website, on this platform for others to see. All right, so hopefully you've had a moment to think about what a character in that future setting might be thinking, might be feeling, and kind of playing around with the idea of who these people are and what their experience of the world is. The next thing that we're going to work on is thinking about place. So I'd like you to think about a place that is important to you. It can be a different place than the one that we visualized in the last session, or it can be the same place. Someplace that you really care about. You don't necessarily have to know it super well, but you want to have some kind of feelings about it. It can be indoor, it can be outdoor. But again, if it's indoors, think about the places around it, the setting, instead of just kind of being confined inside of the walls. Although if the feeling is really about being inside, I think that's okay. So what I want you to do is, I'm going to time this. So take 2 minutes and really just make a list of the words, brainstorm the words that describe that place. Write down as many words as you can for 2 minutes. You have 1 minute left. So keep just throwing down any old word that you can think of related to this place. Just about 10 seconds left. All right. So now I'd like you to look at this word bank that you've created, and I'd like you to identify the words that are nouns and verbs, right? So people, places, and things, or actions. So count up all of the words that are nouns or verbs. And then once you've done that, count the number of adjectives that you have. So while adjectives are really the first way that we often think about describing something, they aren't always the strongest way, because actions and objects, nouns, really have much more power because they are things that are moving around. So I want you to spend a few minutes to add verbs and nouns to your list. We'll do one more minute. Just brainstorming verbs and nouns. All right. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about a few more action words. And this is really based in the idea of showing, not telling. You maybe have heard people say this before, but verbs and nouns really help you kind of paint a picture that comes to life, right? It's not as subject to interpretation as adjectives are. So I want you to look over this word bank that you've created now, and maybe you saw in the instructions that the next step is really to think about some themes that you see emerging. Maybe it's a feeling that seems to kind of be coming out of these words that you've put down. Maybe it's a connection to family or home. It's these themes that you have kind of subconsciously sent out and told yourself about in the brainstorming. So just take a minute and write down one or two themes that you see and that seem true to you, that kind of ring true to your feeling about this place. So what we're going to do with this word bank and this theme is write a poem. And I'm going to ask you to write either an ode or a lament poem. So here are two examples of odes. One is to shoes and one is to teachers. And the idea with an ode really is that it is a poem that lifts up the thing, that really talks about how much you love it, how important it is to you, how much you feel deeply connected to it and really appreciate. It's a poem of appreciation. So you see Ode to My Shoes, which is made up of very short lines and stanzas that are just 4 lines each. Ode to Teachers is a little bit longer. It doesn't really matter. Poetry, it can be free poetry, you can make it rhyme, you can write it in meter if that's something that you like doing. But the idea here is that you're writing something that is an ode. Or you can also write a lament. And a lament is a poem of loss, right? So it's like an ode, but it's something that has gone away. And this lament is really actually about climate change in a deep way and loss of home. So I encourage you to stop the video and read these if you're interested. And then spend as long as you need, really, to use the words in your word bank and write a poem that is an ode or a lament about the place that you are connected to. Okay, so I'd like you to look at your ode and lament and think about if you have been able to communicate the theme that you identified. And think about how you might incorporate more of the words from your word bank to do so. These are first drafts, right? Writing is a process, and good writing has been revised many, many times. So looking over your work and thinking about how you might further your goal of communicating an idea is always useful, because sometimes you can just change a single word and it has much more power. The next writing exercise that we're going to do is a haiku. So I bet you guys have heard of haikus before. There is sort of like a classic, I would call myth, that a haiku is rooted in syllables, 5, 7, 5. So haiku are very short poems. And this 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable thing is sort of relevant. It's kind of a nice parameter to work inside of. But it's also important to remember that haiku were, they originated in Japan, where language is very different and syllables are actually counted very differently as well. So really being stuck to the 5-7-5 haiku sometimes can be limiting and is not always important. What is important is that it's a very short poem, and that it's 3 lines, and that the 3 lines each have a different function. Being that the first 2 lines are a setup, they kind of establish a scene, and then the 3rd line presents a twist or a surprise. So this poem is by Basho, and I'm going to share some other haiku by Basho, who is commonly regarded as the originator of the haiku form. So each of these have a little bit of a surprise in it. Autumn moonlight, a worm digs silently into the chestnut. So we think of worms as digging into the earth. And so then when it becomes a chestnut, it's like, oh, of course, something I wasn't expecting. Or evening rain, the bamboo speaks of it first. And here the bamboo suddenly is personified. We don't think of bamboo as speaking, but Basho has created an unexpected twist to how we might look at this scene. My horse clip-clopping down the road. Oh ho, I'm part of the landscape. Or this classic haiku by Basho that's been translated in many different ways. An old silent pond, a suave young frog jumps, kerplups, silence once more. So the surprise is the sound. And although these two both have 4 lines, it's really the first 2 create the setup, and then the last 2 are the surprise. So I'd like you to play around with this. Think about your collage, think about the future, think about what might change in a surprise. You can also write some haiku about that place that you just wrote about, that you care a lot about. And think about how you can set up a scene that then has a twist. And the twist can be a surprise in what happens, a surprise in how we look at it, a surprise in who or what we are looking at. Yeah, so write as many of these as you want. These are very potentially going to be what you want to put into your book, because you can use many of them and you can kind of plop them in different places. So I encourage you to play around with this. All right, and lastly, we are going to write an apostrophe. So you may be thinking I'm talking about the punctuation mark, but apostrophe is also a word that is used for a literary device that you actually are probably very familiar with. So it's a tool where the writer directly addresses a person, an object, or an abstraction. And for instance, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star is an apostrophe because it's addressing the star. Even when you address an individual and use the word you about something that you want to communicate, that's an apostrophe. So Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, there's lots of songs that use you directly in an apostrophe. And there's also the potential, which is what I'm really interested in for this purpose, of addressing an abstract idea. So what I'd like you to do is write an apostrophe to an abstract idea that is connected to the future or nature or the changing climate. So it can be a poem to the future. It can be a poem to carbon dioxide, or a poem to the atmosphere, or a poem to fossil fuels, a poem to weather, a poem to animals. I want you to think about the vision that you had of the future in the visualization we did last time. Think about your collage. Look at your collage. Consider characters or elements that might be in it, and write something to that. Again, you can stop your video and work on this for a little while. All right, so hopefully by the end of this session, you've got some writing that you've generated. And again, these are drafts, right? It's meant to get some ideas on your pages, to get some words from your mind down so that you can look at them again later and think about what, how you want to use those and who you want to communicate them to. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in session 3, where we pull the collage and the writing together and form our final art book object.